the other key issue that confronted me when I was first elected in 1997 that was beginning to emerge in a much bigger way was a tragedy of missing and murdered women from the downtown East Side, many of whom were sex workers, some of whom were Indigenous women. And I worked very closely with people like Katrina Pacey and Pivot and others who were trying to draw attention to what was happening to women who were literally disappearing from the streets. At the time, the federal laws pertaining to prostitution were very severe. Prostitution in Canada has never been illegal, but everything around it is. So in 1985, there were new laws brought in federally, what was called the communicating law, that made it illegal for either sex workers or customers to communicate in public or in a car for the purposes of prostitution, keeping a common body house, living off the avails of prostitution. These are all illegal under the criminal code. And so again, we get back to this question of criminal justice and who does it serve? And if these laws were designed to, quote, protect women, they actually caused much more harm because they put women who were sex workers on the street, and men too. There are male sex workers, there are trans sex workers who are very high risk. The federal laws actually created enormous risk because basically what you were doing was illegal. And so you know, for sex workers, you get pushed more and more into industrial areas, into the margins where you're not visible, where you can't call for help. You're getting in someone's car, you're being driven away. And so many in the community, we began to believe that there was, because so many women went missing, like upwards of 60 women from one neighborhood. I mean, just think about this, one neighborhood. Many of us believed there was a serial killer, and there were calls to the police to have an investigation that would link all of the, because reports were made about the disappearances, but they were never taken seriously. You know, the response was generally, oh, they're transients, oh, they're prostitutes, oh, they're this, oh, they're that. You know, these people go missing all the time, you know, they don't have addresses. But we were all convinced that something big was going on, something horrible. And eventually, you know, the calls for a public inquiry, for a full-blown investigation did come about, and the RCMP started working with the local Vancouver police. Again, this was a huge issue I raised in Ottawa. I remember meeting with the Minister of Justice, Martin Cochon, and talking to him about the missing and murdered women, and he didn't really know about it. And I was gobsmacked. Like, how could you not know that, you know, that so many women were missing and presumed murdered? And I remember saying to him, if there were 60 plus women in your neighborhood who had gone missing, what, you know, if they were nurses who had gone missing, if they were students from a university campus who had gone missing, there'd be a national outcry. Why is it the A, you don't know about it, and B, why is it that nothing is being done? And so I kept pushing in Ottawa, others kept pushing, and eventually the police, of course, did, after really the most epic failure of the justice system. And I mean, we could go into this for hours. There's been books written. It's certainly something that I write a lot about in my own book, my memoir, Outside In, that was published in 2019. But the whole travesty of the missing and murdered women, and the fact that it took so long, years, to have a police response to the investigation, the needed investigation. And then when they actually got evidence that it was Picton, they let him go because one of the witnesses was a sex worker and was not considered reliable. I mean, it's just the most horrible travesty of justice one can imagine. Eventually, he was arrested and he was charged with, I think it was 50 counts of murder, and he was convicted. But the harm that was done to the community, to the family members, was terrible. But I do want to say that what came out of that as well was a great, what came out of the community was an enormous love to create awareness about this issue. And the Women's Memorial March, which still continues today and is coming up in 2021 very shortly, that begins every year on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, at the epicenter of the downtown Eastside, Main and Hastings. This march takes place every year to remember the missing and murdered women, and to remember, their memory, but also to take action. And I've been to many of those marches, and I remember the first one that I went to, and it wasn't then called the Women's Memorial March, but it was in 1992. So I was actually not even a member of parliament. I was still a city councillor, and a woman's body was found in a dumpster on Dundas Street near Semlin. She was a sex worker. Her body parts were found. And I remember we marched from the dumpster back to the Carnegie Center, about maybe a kilometer or two to the Carnegie Center at Main and Hastings. And there was a smudge ceremony, and there were some speeches, and the community was in mourning. The community was in grief. But it was the first time that I think there was sort of a broader community awareness about the issue in the downtown East Side. And it was at that point that people in the community, including me, began calling for a bigger police investigation, that there was a serial killer out there, and that they couldn't just, write off these disappearances as sort of transient happenings. So that's how far back it goes. And it took many, many years for the federal government to adopt a national public inquiry on the missing and murdered women, because then it became clear it wasn't just Vancouver, it was happening in other places. It was happening in northern BC, Highway 16, where many women had disappeared on this highway, very, very remote place. And then, there were other disappearances across Canada. And so it really did become a national issue, but it began in the downtown East Side with that community awareness going back to 1992.